And here we go. Welcome to the Open Discourse Net seminar, London. My name is Jaspal Singh, and together with Johannes Angermüller, Michael Kranert, and Stephanie Schneider, I extend a warm welcome to everybody. Stephanie will now introduce our speaker for today.
Hey, hi everyone. I'm not going to keep you for too long. I just would like to briefly and very excitedly introduce Dr. Majid KhosraviNik. He is a senior lecturer in digital media and discourse studies at Newcastle University, where he teaches modules on digital discourses and identity, or politics, power, and communication. I know Majid from my time at Newcastle University. I was at a different department, but I was very interested in the topic of how refugees and migrants are represented in the media. And if you are interested in this topic, like I am, I can warmly recommend Majid's work. He has published extensively on the topics like nationalism, immigration discourses, and right-wing populism across multiple national contexts, for instance, Britain and Iran. But more recently, his interest lies within the area of critical discourse studies and social media. And this will also be what his talk today will be about. So his publications are about how we consume content online, how we interact with information, and how it's presented to us. And I'm very excited to hear more about this today. So without further ado, Majid, please go ahead. And all of you, if you have questions throughout the talk, please pop them in the chat. And as Jaspal said in the beginning, we are very looking forward to a good discussion after the talk. So you can also just wait until then and then just raise your hand and we'll share it then. So enjoy the talk. Majid, over to you.
Thank you very much, Stephanie, for that very kind and generous introduction. And thank you, Jaspal and Johannes, for your invitation to talk for DiscourseNet. And thank you, everyone, for coming to this talk. I'm going to share my slides and then talk over that. Okay, so all good?
Yeah, it's all perfect.
Okay, so I'm going to start giving you a little bit of an overview of what I want to do, but mainly I wanted to emphasize on the first line here, which is basically something that I want to cover in this slide anyway. I come from a CDA background, so I am trained as a discourse analyst, CDA analyst, you know, by my education and all that. But what I am writing about, trying to clarify in my more recent writing, when I talk about social media CDA, it's not about the discourse side of the analysis. It's not about linguistic theories, for example, which I assume that we all to some extent know and are familiar with, and we do research with our tools, the tools and methods that we have been trained with, and so I don't cover that. I mean, I do obviously do a lot of linguistic analysis when I do case studies and get into details of the discourse in terms of its materiality and the content and the way language and other modalities are being used. So in my publications, when I do case studies, obviously there's a lot of discourse analysis in a traditional sense. But what I think is missing is basically more of a top level notes, if you like, or guidelines, or heads up, really, in doing CDA when we are dealing with digital media. And some of these are, to me, are very crucial in the way we understand meaning making online, and partly also in my attempts in trying to say that we cannot import everything from the way we used to do CDA and just do the same thing there, because because it's a different, and that's what I'm trying to cover here, the reasons why we cannot do this here. So I'm going to talk about social media communication as a paradigm, as a type of communication, if you like, rather than a place or a specific set of platforms, and try to see how it may link to the notion of discourse the way we understand it. And then some of the reconsideration that I think we could actually put in place for this. And then I talk about some of these technological aspects or impacts which are very important in this time, at least. I mean, I completely argue that it's also about the content, but if it's not about the content, it's about the styling, it's about the shape of the discourse that we deal with. And then I will try to end with some notes and proposals on what are the areas that we should actually watch out for, or what principles we should move towards, if you like. So I would like to think about social media as one of the communication paradigms, which is now a very emerging and very important and very prevailing paradigm. And that would be, if you think about the modern media as working within the mass communication paradigm, which caused a lot of research and contemplation and philosophies about the way media is shaping our modernity and what's the link of media and society, and including, of course, you know, the Discourses studies and semiotic studies and other research where they looked at mass media as the fact that this is a mass communicated system makes a big difference, and it's important, it's powerful to be analyzed. And that paradigm has always been about linearity of textual flow, which was very key. There was clear cut between producers and consumers, and there was always this understanding that there is huge power in it, okay, or behind it, because the discourse is like an elite group, you know, can impact the society en masse. In the way that we can theorize that, there are a lot of arguments, a lot of debate. I think for decades there was debates about how this happens. Some were saying that it's a bit too extreme to assume that the audiences are passive, and all that debate in media, cultural studies, and communication studies, which I do agree with. But nevertheless, nobody really said that this is not important, we should not analyze. And then we, from linguistic point of view, we also have interpersonal communication, which is not politically powerful automatically. So that's where I like conversations, for example, or small groups interactions, and this is not necessarily powerless, but it's a different kind of power, which in 2014 publication, I tried to position this into different notions of power in discourse. And I was arguing that interpersonal communication is still powerful, but it's power within the content and the way that it builds up, you know, from a localized point of view. But whereas mass communication is powerful by itself already. Or other forms of powerful text as well, like, you know, politicians having access to masses, or journalists, or all groups who have this kind of mass communicative paradigmatic access, and which Van Dyck refers to as symbolic elites. But now when we think about social media communication, my understanding is that there's a lot of mix and matches. There are a lot. You've got interpersonal communication, you've got mass communication, you have combination of both, and you have new forms of communication which are very indigenous for this platform. And for this platform, there's the circularity of textual practice, or at least there is this assumption that this happens, you know. Yes, and again, the criticism is there that with corporatization, this capacity is diminishing and all that, which I do agree with. But also the fact that there is no clear-cut, at least theoretically speaking, clear-cut differentiation between producers and consumers of textual material or content, if you like. And there's a mix of top-down and bottom-up discourses. So institutions can put their stuff there, but also ordinary people can also feedback and have that interaction. And when it comes to thinking about this as why this is important for discourses studies, hence why there's power, obviously there is power there, but the power is not as defined as we could do in the previous paradigm. So the power is fleet, it's changing, is emerging, but nobody can argue that it's not important or it's not powerful. So then I thought maybe we should think about social media communication as a paradigm in terms of what makes this interactive context. And I came up with three conditions for that. Some of these wordings, may need to be redefined now, and as things are changing very quickly. But in general, that would be what I would assume to be a context where social media communication can happen, including, of course, most of the social networking sites, but also not everything that is online or digitally communicated is necessarily social media communication. I had a student who wanted to analyze Tinder, for example, and she came to me and said, yeah, when you have these conditions and all that, but Tinder is not really, it doesn't qualify. And she was correctly identifying the fact that that is more of an interpersonal communication, which is true. But at the same time, it doesn't mean that we cannot do CDA on that, because there's a lot of semiotics involved. And there are different approaches to doing that. But in terms of defining or locating social media communication conditions, she was right. I have two slides here where we talk about discourse, and I don't want necessarily to go over this in detail, but and just get to the second one, which is more important. When people ask me what is discourse, it's always been a key question. I try to simplify things, and in my head, it's a concept that we have developed to be able to explain the process of meaning making, like how did that message get communicated? Why did these people take that message from what you said? And that is obviously the notion of discourse, because discourse shapes and fills in the gaps, and it works like a grammar rule for you to understand the message, or for the communication to effectively take place. More maybe familiar understanding of this discourse is about how language and other modes of communication work in society. In terms of the literature in media cultural studies, when we say discourse, they usually go to the Foucauldian understanding of that, which is as a structure, as a network, a system of representation which is rigid, and it shapes you, it shapes a society in certain topics. Or referring to Stuart Hall, they usually see it as a structured knowledge systems or information system or evaluation system, or all of the above together, which is I would see this as a capital D discourse in terms of Paul G's understanding of these two discourses. But also from a linguistic point of view, we also have discourse which is usually referred to our data. And we say, what is your discourse to be analyzed? And sometimes we use discourse in that sense, and that's also equally valid, but there are different understandings of it. My understanding of CDA is that our job is to try to connect the small d discourse as in our data, with the capital D discourse as in structures, discourses in place in the society. And that's our job, to do the analysis and then try to position it within wider structures of meaning making, hence discourses in place. And I'll always refer to G's understanding of the capital D discourse and small d discourse, and I think that clarifies a lot of things. There's also another way sometimes people refer to discourse as more or less like a genre, like we talk about medical discourse or sports discourse, which is also fine, but more importantly, I think these three would be the main understanding of discourse that we would work in CDA perspective or CDS perspective. So discourse as macro topic relatedness of a body of meaning-making content, if you ask me, or text or data, in the way that Ruth Wodak talks about discourse, and the way that this discourse historical approach understands discourse. And that's why we in that approach, we talk about discourse on gender, discourse on racism, or discourse on race and stuff like that. And then there is also the other notion of discourse as topic plus perspective, which is more of more of a Faircloffian, if you like, the way Norma Fairclough has been using this and has been understanding this. So the evaluation is within that naming of the discourse as well, like racist discourse or misogynist discourse. From pure linguistic backgrounds, discourse analysis, not necessarily CDA, just discourse analysis, stems from the first understanding where the analysis started to go above the sentence level and try to explain the semantics of a sentence by referring to other parts of the text, and that was a breakthrough, obviously, in linguistic analysis towards a critical analysis of CDA. So these three, I think, are very important in the way that we understand discourse and we should be analyzing it. So in the way I talk about social media discourse, the top part is discourse, and I don't get into that, in this talk or when I talk about social media discourses that is in general, in terms of the framework and guidelines, because that's what we do with discourse and the way that we do our analysis, the linguistic theories that we want to implement, or combination of different methods or tools. You can do all kinds of things, in analyzing that, depending on, of course, what the topic is, what this discourse is, and what modality we are talking about. Are we talking about language, or talking about visuals, or talking about what kind of meaning-making materiality are we talking about? So I leave that there. But the most important thing for me when talk about social media CDA is to position that analysis, not necessarily after you have done the analysis, but also before you do analysis and after you do analysis, basically positioning between the two angles of the digital and the social. And I'm taking that from the notion of the political, which means in the way that we understand the social aspects and digital aspect, and the kind of engagement that we are having to these two different levels, which I try to elaborate now. So when I talk about the social, we are talking about connection between D discourse and capital D discourse. We are talking about a connection of the findings that we came to in our discourse analysis, and the way that we can put it in terms of the structures of discourses which are already in place in that particular context, which means the network of discourses in place means that we are talking about that cultural, political, or social context in which this particular body of discursive practice is positioned, and that the process of interpreting that, which is a very big necessity for CDA, if you ask me. In other words, we are talking about discourse, looking at discourse as text and context put together, and that would be social contextualization. We talk about context of production and consumption of meaning, like how, under what conditions this society is operating, what is already available in regards to that discourse or that topic, what are the issues, what are maybe the elements we should consider in the way that in the way that we are analyzing our discourse. For example, is there censorship in the society? Is there any inhibitions to say this or not to say that, which causes ways of meaning making? Definitely. And of course, linking your discourse analysis with critical theory, which I think is very important. And that would be critique, engagement with issues, doing a little bit of a Frankfurt School kind of analysis wherein you want to intervene by the help of your analysis and critical theory. It's political, if you like. And I don't use political here in this sense as a negative thing. I'm actually saying that it is a good thing and it should happen, but of course, it's based on the data analysis and based on theory and all of that. And this is also one of the criticism that I have on some of the approaches where they do brilliant work on digital discourse, but at least to the way I understand it, it's not political enough, or it's not contextualized critically enough, really. When we talk about the digital, we are talking about the local context of production and consumption of meanings, like as it happens, like online and in that specific localized interface, which is digitally mediated. It's about genre specification, what forms, what combinations, what types of normalized practices are at work in that particular discursive practice. Its context of mediation and distribution, how these discourses or how are these meaning-making contents. By the way, I deliberately avoid to use the term text because I think it's one of the things that we should actually maybe find a replacement for, and that where we normally say text, I try to say meaning-making content, and later on I add practices to that as well. It's also about technological foregrounding and backgrounding, how the content is being foregrounded, backgrounded, made more important, less important, or made more visible or less visible, how it is being promoted, for example, how the algorithms work in pushing the content onto the prospective audiences. And what kind of new discursive artifacts are at play, like maybe meaning making is not within the known modalities, which obviously language and other multimodal features, but also it may be through stuff which was never really within the repertoire of multimodal analysis that we consider, and that is still very much meaning making, and it is pretty much political. It does the same thing as the language does. So any systems of communication have ideologies behind them and are capable of showing a stance and evaluation and all of that. But also, this is about the norm of digital practice on that particular local digital context, and how these practices can also be systematically meaning-bearing, and how they can systematically be part of a discursive construction, representation, and consumption. For example, regimes of likes, shares, tagging, groupings, and all of that. And that's why instead of text, basically, I have tried to use the term meaning-making content and practices. So basically anything that is meaning-making, which comes to the content, that's something materiality that we can actually analyze, and practices that we can observe and analyze. So in signposting, what I would like to say very casually refer to as SMCDS, but also it's not very casual because I have to call it something to be able to talk about it, But at the same time, it's not just doing the discourse analysis online. It's certain guidelines that I think we should consider. It's not like we can do it all the time, or I have been able to implement all this all the time, but that's what I think should be the parameters of where we stand and how we want to try and do this. First of all, there's no dichotomy between online and offline distinctions. That doesn't matter really. It didn't matter in the past as well, but right now, a lot of research show that this was never really separated. It's about discourse. For us, it's about discourse. It doesn't matter what medium or what kind of mediation we're talking about. It goes from one medium to another. It goes from television to society to social media and the other way around. So we do discourse analysis. And in that sense, we cannot really keep that dichotomy there, which some research approaches do actually, and then they overgeneralize what they do online into the society and all that. So our focus is on discourse, not just the technology, not just the users, and that's also something that it's a demarcation between technology studies and fully ethnographic studies. So we still want to be able to talk about discourse as in meaning making and systems of meaning making and the way that it systematically represents the world to us. We do empirical focus on actual meaning making rather than maybe trying to see what people think happens online. So that's also another thing which is valuable to do, but still, that's a different kind of discourse analysis, if you ask me. If you go and ask people what you think is happening online on Tinder or on TikTok or here and there, that's one thing, good. But also it's not a discursive practice that actually happens there. So I would argue that the main thing would be on what is happening online, as in the way that you, as a scholar, you can observe or collect or analyze. And there should be the link to, there should be critique, not just describing what is going on, but also putting the digital in the, or integrating the digital with the social, bringing in social theory, which is something that I sometimes feel is not done enough in some of the approaches, which are really brilliant in what I think CDA is missing. But then again, they don't do this bit as well as the CDA traditionally does really well. It's not just about what happens on social media, but also how it influences socio-political context, which is more or less the same thing. It's problem-oriented, not just about genre. For example, it's not about language of Facebook, for example, language of this, language of that, which is, again, very, very good and important and on its own. But this is CDA, which so is problem-oriented. And it is textually focused here, and I'm using textually here in quotation marks, which basically means this is about some content that we are analyzing, or meaning-making materiality that we're analyzing. It's not speculative, for example. It's not also about what the technology is offering only. It's also about what people are doing with that technology in the way that they perceive or represent certain discursive positions, or substantiate it, or reproduce it, and all that kind of thing. The same kind of focus that we have always had in doing discourse analysis. Obviously, we looked at the content. One of the arguments here about techno-discursive consideration, which is a term that I thought, maybe it is useful, is about trying to see the point that technology and discourse are not necessarily very separated, and they impact on each other, on well, more so technology on discourse, and at the same time, if not about the content, at least they impact in terms of the manipulating the discursive power, their visibilities, the shape and style of conversations or content, and all of that. And that, in that sense, then it may lead to different outcomes, which I will try to explain a bit later. So technological design is part of critical analysis of digital discourse. Otherwise, we won't be able to understand why this discourse, as in data, is the way it is, what are the norms of practice, and what are the deviations away from that practice, and all of that. The techno-discursive analysis is about considering meaning-making at the intersection of technology and discourse consumption and production. Hence, there is some emphasis on trying to concentrate on when and how it happens, and how it is consumed, including how the technology works, how it operates, what it is foregrounding and backgrounding, and all of that I just mentioned. It's about how the new digital affordances of expression function discursively for the users, and the way digital media impacts users' encounters with such discourses. So if you talk about users' encounters, we're talking about gatekeeping at the level of discourse topics. Basically, certain topics do not get promoted or do not get algorithmically pushed. So it's not a thing in this platform or that platform. Another topic may get pushed or may get foregrounded by the way technology is designed. Despite the fact that we keep hearing that technology is neutral, technology is not. I know technology is neutral. There is always an ideological operating software, basically, which is actually the main thing in terms of corporate social media now, and the way that discourses are shaped there. So some of the technological impacts that I think are very relevant, the way that we want to do discourse analysis, for example, one of them is the affect. And the fact that these contexts, social media contexts, are very highly affective. And the research also, earlier research shows that they are not argumentative as such. At least, I mean, definitely they are not deliberative. And there's the little argumentation in a way that we normally expect in political communication. on social media, but there is so much about connection, connectivity, relatability, storytelling, sharing, subjectivity, sharing emotions, bringing in emotions in the way that you want to argue for and against a topic. In another publication, actually, I try to explain why these systems become very effective. And obviously, partly, as always, is about the way that the political economy of social media is defined and designed. You know, it's about connection and more consumption of users who should be brought in and spend time and share and add to the content, all of that. So that's the operating system there, which links to some of these affective ambience, if you like. But then again, you know, we have to realize that this affectivity is also the way that political communication in contemporary societies is I don't know, I don't want to say inflicted by, but it is the way it is. You know, in socio-political context as well, we have a lot of affective politics rather than politics being about proper communication, proper argumentation and logic, all of that, which is the part of the technological impact, if you like. The other point is about thinking about how echo chambers are produced and how that links to tribalism over arguments and exaggerations. There's so much of us and them very easily and very sharply. You know, a lot of issues that we used to talk about as subtle racism or anti-Semitism or homophobia and all of that, where we were trying to analyze the subtle ways of doing this. And now basically it's not really subtle, really, and just very out there. And in echo chambers, we basically it's all about who can shout our position in a more effective and with louder voice, and it's about communication of anger without really any room to be able to deliberate on that. Key point: algorithmic interface. Like, what is it that you're seeing, and how is it that you're seeing what you're seeing? Is it about obviously all social media platforms? They actually would like to show you what you like to see, so that you can watch more, you can interact more, you can engage more, you can enjoy more, you can be happy, and that's the way you see the world. Yes, different platforms are different in the degree, in the way that they use the algorithms and the way that they algorithmically regiment or organize the content. Yes, some, for example, Twitter is less evil. Okay, they don't do so far a lot of algorithmic redistribution of the content, but anything linked to Facebook and Meta, basically, they are notorious in the way that they basically actually give you algorithmic organization of the content and combination of both. Like in Instagram, you see what people who are following, but also if you go, for example, to explore, you will see the stuff that they know you may like. But if you go to TikTok, for example, TikTok is basically 100% algorithmically organized, and there's no point. They just tell you, come in and we'll show you what you like, and that's the way it operates, and that's the way it became very successful in recent years. So algorithms basically are taking over in the way that we understand the world in discourses that we get exposed to, or systematic representations that we get exposed to. So there's huge amount of power there for shaping up our understanding or analyzing. So if you want to analyze a platform which is very algorithmically organized, and then you do your analysis, and then you come and say, yeah, this is the way it shows, and not talk about the why this discursive ordering is happening, then basically there is a lot to be missed in the critical argument that you want to be able to make. Also, in terms of the way that the market logic and the logic of visibility is changing as the main source of legitimacy, and that's because is powerful. If you are visible, you become visible on social media, i.e. if you become famous or you got a lot of followers, no matter what, then you are powerful. Discursively, you are powerful, right? But also economically, you can make a lot of money. And it's all about, then you can actually capitalize on that and do everything, which is fine if you take this to commercial world. But the problem is that the same kind of logic is now more or less happening in political communication or in identity communication or identity discourse as well. And that causes a lot of problems because not everything that is popular necessarily is correct. And not all democratic systems can be reduced to a contest of visibility or popularity. And also, in news gathering, news aggregators like Volatary that I know about, it's very easy to actually snowball a fake news, and you can actually orchestrate 100 people who work with you, and then you give them a push, and then the whole snowball effect takes that piece of news and takes it to the first page, and then it becomes on top of the agenda, and everybody thinks that, okay, this must be really true because in the first page, and that it may completely be fake. And that's also why partly we also can argue that part of the issue with the popularity of fake news or rising fake news is also about the technology itself, which is about attention economy. It's about attention. If you can grab attention, then that's fine. But you have to think about, okay, so that's the operating logic in social media. What does that entail in terms of the shape and the content of the discourses or systematic representations that we will get through these, which operate under this principle? What we will get is a lot of controversy, a lot of clickbaiting, a lot of moral panic, a lot of trolling, a lot of alarmist discourses. So if you say something that you can scare people, that definitely attracts the attention. Or if you just say something that angers people, then that takes a lot of attention. And if you say something that people really like and really want to watch and share, then you have succeeded. So you realize that all these points that I just mentioned, they're all about affectivities and about emotions, about the way you feel. And that's why, there's so much fake news, really, or all this alarmism, which exists in different levels in different social media platforms. Yeah, sometimes, like older generations, like my father sending something, say, oh, do you know that this is happening and this is really bad, or this is poisonous and stuff like that, which is a very, I would say, very ordinary function of the same thing in social media. This leads to what I would see as at least a populist style of communication. I don't mean here necessarily the right-wing populism. I mean, if there's a high level of affectivity in the discourse representation, then there is some level of populism there, because this distinction between emotions and argumentation and all of that, which I know that there is a debate there to be had in terms of if they can be separated or not. But if I'm always skeptical of things being too emotional or too subjective or too affective in that sense. So in right-wing populists, of course, there's a lot of one of you discourses, which brings about a lot of legitimacy, which links to claims of authenticity. And that's a very key point here. People on social media have claims to show you something which other representations do not show. I mean, the assumption is that a lot of right-wingers in the US or everywhere, actually, they keep talking about the traditional media not showing the society, and we are doing that and that kind of thing. But also this ethos of anti-expertism and all that. And all of that works within the market logic that this is about increasing consumption and engagement, which is the way algorithm works and impacts on the way that people use that algorithm to get get to you and get to followers so that it can capitalize on that economically otherwise. Okay, the last two slides. I just became very conscious of the time, really. For social media, let's see if there. Yes, there are. So we have to see social media as a communicative paradigm, not a specific platform, which then we will be able to understand how it works and why, for example, we cannot do proper gatekeeping, why we cannot, for example, do censoring, because it's as someone explained, it's like having a telephone call when you are watching television. Okay, so it's okay to maybe regulate the television, but it's not okay to get into the interpersonal conversation of people. And in social media, it's usually a mix of both at the same time, all the time. And you can't really separate this. And one becomes the other and the other becomes one. For example, interpersonal communication can become also mass communication. If you get into a debate with your friend on a wall of Facebook, and everybody can see that, then it is interpersonal communication, which is happening en masse. So basically everybody is also seeing. So it's a bit complicated in terms of regulation and control, but the power is there. Definitely the power is powerful. Some of the revisit that we have to do, some of the assumptions like the scarcity power. The scarcity power is there, but it's not in the same way as we assumed or as we normally assume for CDA, like from politicians or television or other mass media. Also, the notion of text, which I explained, I think it's not enough really, or it should be changed. Adaptation of, we've got all different kinds of tools to bring into this. I don't know, you may have noticed that with emphasis on the discursive practice, as in what happens on that local context of interface between the user and the technology. Then we are talking about some sort of observational systems or observational methods, some sort of ethnography to be brought in, which is, by the way, what a lot of work already, like in literacy studies, in the works of people like Rodney Jones and his colleagues who are following Ron Scholar and analyzing discourse in action. They have done brilliant work in that aspect, which I think is now the time for CDA to go back and have a look at that and bring that in, at least for this phase. There's another issue there. I think that the way they do that is it may not be critical enough, for a CDA perspective, but that's where for social media CDA we need to really incorporate that in the analysis, and of course multimodality, which is now something you cannot really escape. And we refer to discourse as all forms of meaning making, including the new discursive artifact and its new multimodal resources, like the way that groupings work, regimes of likes, which is about practices rather than the content. Discursive content not separated from the digital practice of its production. Of course, digital practice as part of digital discourse, no separation of meaning-making content from the digital context of use, because that's where the meaning gets constructed. So you cannot just take the data and go home and do some analysis on that. You can, to some extent, if you have already done your observational analysis or digital ethnography of the production and consumption. But you cannot just separate this and not account for their process of production and consumption for that particular discourse. And the impact of distributions and the strategies to distribute this, which is the explanation I gave about algorithm. One thing that I think we should actually include in this is about bringing in digital systematic observation as part of social media discourse studies to be able to analyze the two levels of digital and discourse. Sorry, actually, it wasn't really the last two slides. Okay, I'm going to go a bit faster than this. One argument that we put forward is to have this double contextualization, to talk about horizontal digital context, which is the context of production and consumption of discourse there, and then the vertical social context, wherein you say why this discourse is the way it is by mapping it onto the context, the social context that it stems from or it feeds back into. So you do two levels of contextualization. And also, we have to assume that technological affordance is not the actual social and political change. That's where for people, when we do analysis on digital side, the horizontal side, and they kind of assume that if it is possible online, then the society is also is similar in terms of giving that those kind of opportunities to everyone. Like if it is for you possible to say something online freely and do not get arrested, then the society is also like that and can do that. Or the other way around, if you're, I don't know, the structural issues of race, identity, gender, social class, and all of these do not seem to be important online, it also means that, you know, then offline the world is like that. It's not going the other way around. So thick context, as in, like, you know, the broad context of society still matters. The suggestions about using communicative content and practices for text, I don't know if we can stick. I just think that communicates what I have in mind better. Also the recalibration of the notion of discursive practice, which is one of the difficult notions in Faircloughian ways, and what he means by that. But it's very, to me, it's relatively simple if you look at it with the way that Rodney Jones and literacy people actually talk about this, which is actually about the practice and about digital at that particular point. If you think about digital discourse, and representation, which I think it shouldn't be a linear thing. You know, I don't know. Someone asked me, like, what do you mean? What should we do about this? I don't know the exact answer for that. I still think that they have representational power. Social media discourses hugely representational power, and they are important. We should do that. But also, it should be less rigid, and it should be a bit more dynamic somehow in the way that we talk about this. The two key points that I think we should definitely work on more in terms of bringing into our CDA studies on social media. One is observational approaches, whatever it is. A lot of people actually do this. They just don't want to mention it, or it's not done systematic enough. But you have to be able to get into details of the affordances, the discussing material, the technology, all of that altogether. So you cannot do that unless you actually really focus on what is happening and try to do a period of observations anyway. And this is not only about trying to find where the data is and then go and collect it and go home with it, you know, which is also important, very important, you know, like what Yanis Androtsopoulos talks about in terms of discourse-centered online ethnography. That's very good, you know, in terms of doing this. No, I don't agree with the whole thing, because then it goes on a full-on ethnographic analysis, and then it goes to users and all of that. But part of that is definitely is what I think is useful for social media CDA. And multimodality, which is, it goes without saying really, and you can't really avoid this. It's multimodal space, but also at the same time new modalities of communication, including something that we do, not something that we say, like, you know, oh, you like this, you don't like that. You tag this person, or this hashtag, or that hashtag. So these are the stuff that we do. It's a practice, but also is part of, I think, it's part of multimodal meaning making, which construct the discourses in a broader sense. Okay, I'm going to stop now and see if we can continue this discussion through questions and comments. Thank you very much for listening.
Majid, thank you very, very much. That was a brilliant, very rich theoretical kind of account of, you know, CDA used for social media analysis. Steffi, would you like to lead the Q&A?
Yes, I'm happy to.
Yeah.
I was a bit slow there because it just wouldn't let me unmute. Okay, we already have 2 questions in the chat, but if you have a question, you can use the is there a raise hand function here? But yeah, there should be. And then we'll just call your name and you can ask your question directly. Andres, I don't know, would you like me to read out your questions in the chat, or would you just like to ask your question yourself? Are you still here?
Yes, I'm here. I cannot turn my camera on, so sorry because of that. Thank you very much for your talk. I really appreciate that. So just two questions, if I may. The first one is regarding to the methods. So as we approach different forms of communication, in this case, the digital, is it time to give more weight to quantitative methods, corpus linguistics, natural language processing, Twitter mining? So that's the first question. And the second one is related to algorithms, because we all know they are there, but it's quite difficult to know how are they designed, and platforms are not willing, of course, to be transparent on how algorithms are designed. So that is a challenge for analysts. How are we to approach that opacity? Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, excellent questions, really. Okay, the first one about method. I don't think that there is a need for a shift to quantitative methods, okay? But they have always been part of CDA studies, and if they are part of the CDA frame, and that they work very well. And yes, of course, if you can act, we do a lot of big data methods where there is a lot of system or crawlers that can collect information and put it together. So definitely we need some sort of quantitative methods to be able to analyze that. But I'm very adamant to emphasize on the fact that this should still be done within a CDA rubric, and not just because I'm really I don't know, a CDA enthusiast. It's because there is epistemologically there's a clash there. Especially with big data and media technology people, and the way that we do research from a social scientific point of view. But one of the aims and one of my maybe wishes for me is to be able to integrate those methods in the way that we do CDA. That's what I try to do as well. Just plugging in a book that we are editing with Eleonora now. We are actually trying to encourage people to see what new methods they can bring in and how they can work within CDA approach. So definitely Twitter mining, stuff from digital humanities, corpus linguistics, all of these, as long as they are part of what we are doing in a bigger framework for CDA and those principles. About the, I have to also say that recently I read a Twitter thread about how corpus linguistic is changing, and to me, corpus linguistic now seems pretty much CDA. There's a lot of people saying that, yeah, corpus, you have to understand that language is also is an action. I say, yeah, that's pretty much CDA principle, from the beginning, and which is a good thing, but sometimes it's a bit interesting to see how things evolve, actually. The other thing about algorithm, yes, you're right, it's very difficult to observe them. That's why I think, the only way we can do that, we cannot do it technologically, like scientifically, because they do not let you do that, but what we can do is to try to see the effect of that, and that's why I think we cannot help but do some sort of observations, critical observation of the way things are, or analyze the platforms that we know about and kind of understand how it works, which is always the case. Don't do CDA on stuff that you don't know about, and that's the principle that we should actually go. But yes, you're right, algorithms are not really visible for us to be able to control and analyze them.
Thank you very much, Majid. I can see Johannes has his hands up, but if anyone else would like a question, please feel free. Again, you can pop it in the chat or just raise your hand as well. But Johannes, go ahead.
Hey, thanks. This was a very useful overview of all kinds of different theoretical developments. And I'm wondering what the hell has happened to the critical and social ambitions of CDS? CDS, of course, has always been extremely interested in the politics of truth, and social media has raised all kinds of issues about post-truth critique, all kinds of new forms of mobilization and the epistemological dimensions of all that. I mean, where would you see the place in terms of that? And also, I mean, in terms of the sociological ambitions, I mean, of course, there are huge implications about the way that society works, that social practices are performed, but not only in the abstract, but concretely about historical configurations of power and knowledge. And I was wondering, where do we find that?
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with you. For my taste, we should do more stuff like that, really. And I don't know. What I can tell you is that part of the problem is the hiccup in the way that these drastic changes have caused a little bit of a conceptual hiccup in terms of what we should be doing. And for example, CDA is not very well equipped for analyzing this affectivity as the political norm, for example. And they don't know what to do, or we don't know what to do, or at least we don't have a good solution for that. A lot of people in human geographies and people, people that I know in media cultural studies and in sociology, they also argue that the moment of discursivity has passed, because they assume that discursivity and discourse is always been about argumentation, and this is really not about argumentation in the sense that we have always been dealing with in the past, I don't know, 50 years, for example, or more. And now we should be talking about other aspects and not the representational discourse doesn't hold anymore. Also philosophically, which is something that I try to fend again in some writing which has never been published, and I try to say that no, the affective side is there, but also this is still about discourse, in one way or another. I do like to engage with those things, and it's not like something I can do, but all alone. But yeah, I mean, if you think there is a lack there and there's people who are not engaging with that, that's what I'm trying to say, because I think the whole orientation is moving away from that kind of sociological engagement or critique. It's becoming, it's like we're also kind of admitting that we should stay descriptive or, relatively less ambitious in terms of the impact of our research or the philosophical engagement that we have. I've always had problems with that, because I think that's what a problem with the descriptivism a lot. But it's becoming more of a norm. I agree with that. Then it's difficult to do everything altogether. And this is partly the idea that I want to fend off against that kind of non-critical CDA, if you like. If there is such a thing.
That's great. A non-critical critical discourse studies. Thanks a lot.
I mean, it has been a thing from a long time ago. I mean, I remember long ago, like at least 10 years ago, I read a paper by Andrew Sayer, who was actually criticizing, the sociological work, but non-critical, critical sociological work, which is very interesting for me to read. So I think CDA has that as the essence. So we have to keep that as it is. It's political in the sense of critique. It has to be there.
Thank you very much. I can see Jesper, you've got your hand up. You wanna? Oh, where are you?
Yeah, great. Thank you. So my question goes into a similar direction, like Johannes's question, but it's more concerned with the question of ethics and research ethics. Now, when we had CDA in its early years, we were in an offline world, and people would critical discourse analysts would analyze media, newspaper, for instance, political speeches, political campaigns, as well as advertising and marketing campaigns, right? So here the researcher, the critical discourse analyst sort of had a right or took the right, you know, in the sense of speaking for social justice, to look at these powerful text producers and say, I'm going to unpick this and show the racism in there or whatever it is. Now, in the social media age, we have prosumers, so all of us become text producers. So the question is really, what is the ethical position of the researcher, of the critical discourse analyst doing work on social media? Can they just go in and say, okay, I'm going to look at these 15,000 comments or whatever written by regular people and analyze them in the same way as they would analyze a speech by George W. Bush or Donald Trump? So I hope you understand where I'm coming from. So do you have any thoughts on that, and how maybe the ethical positions will change when we analyze social media and digital circuits? Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it definitely changes, and it's very complicated in the way that we talk about ethics. Definitely, we cannot do the same thing as we used to do for mass communication, because it's not as powerful. That means it's not as relevant as you think it is, or it's not automatically relevant. Okay, so when we think about ethics and dealing with social media, obviously there's so many research, so many studies, you know, about how we should do this, how we should be protective of the rights and all of that. But also we can talk about ethics in terms of ethics of access, ethics of judgment, and ethics of ethics of protection. And so if you talk about ethics of judgment, then we are talking about the philosophical assumptions we are making about this body of communication, and should we, are we in the right position to do this, are we not? That's one thing which there's a very good special issue of CDS on that, which Phil Graham edited that recently, which is about ethics of critique, basically. Okay, but more problematic is the ethics of access and ethics of protection, in terms of what is it that we can actually go and do, and how can we actually do research on social media. So the short answer is we can't. Almost we can't, because it's so complicated in terms of what we can or cannot do. And I right now I have two major projects now in ethics committee, and we do paperwork after paperwork trying to pass these. I had a postdoc working on terrorism, and half of the postdoc basically was spent on trying to get that ethical approval, and then where you're going to keep the data, and then it's also about protection of the people involved, but also protection of the researcher themselves, you know, and that's another thing that we should consider. So I don't talk about ethics there because it's very complicated and it's not something I write about, but your question is very relevant to what we do in CDA. We should actually come up with a framework, like, you know, in International Organization of Internet Researchers, they come up with a framework every year. And I think someone somewhere we should put together something for CDA and say this is what we should be doing, and these are practical ways of doing it. These are to look out for. What I can do is, you know, to include a chapter on ethics of doing CDA online, which is written by one of our colleagues in this new book that is coming out. So that's we acknowledge that that's the main thing. That's an important thing. But I think we should go a bit more institutional about considering this, maybe working with the ethics committee of a university or our university and come up with something so that we can do this. I have had this issue, and sometimes I had to make the call by my own guts, really, and I say, okay, so I think it's okay, let's do this. And then obviously I also had my doubts and guilt at some point, like, oh, maybe we shouldn't have published this or stuff like that. So it's very complicated and almost on the verge of being impossible if you want to go through all the hoops all the time, you know. So that's a good question, though. Really, it's important.
Thank you.
Thank you. And one more hand just went up. Laili, if you want to, sorry if I said your name wrong, if you want to go ahead with your question.
Yeah, sure. Thank you for the time. My question is similar to Jaswal, and now conducting a research is about the commenting on social media, and I use CD approach. But as you say that we are confused in ethical position of the researcher, that what is it? The discourse, the digital discourse will change of the analyzing. So this is what I'm confusing of my research that I'm conducting. The case that I'm doing is like I try to collect the commenting of the people, the public society on the YouTube. Then I try to collect the commentary of them. Then what should I do to analyze the commentary of them with the appraisal, the critical discourse analysis approach?
So if you mean in terms of the ethics of access, like can I analyze these? There is an unsubstantiated argument saying that it's very arguable, but it's saying that if it is in the public, if you access it in public domains online, then it is probably fine. If it is something that you have to log in and create a username and password that is more of a closed community, then you have to ask for their consent, really. So if you pass this hurdle of assuming that, okay, this is public YouTube and I'm analyzing this, so it's fine, then you have to think about the ethics of reproducing them, like anonymity, for example. Like if I want to give examples in my research, how should I protect the names so that they are not revealed to other people? That's another aspect of it. I don't know. It depends on your university and how they instruct you in the way that you can do CDA online. I don't know if your question is about ethics and you're worried about this, then we have to see if university is okay with that. There is another level of gatekeeping. Sometimes when you want to publish this stuff, the publishers may ask you to say where this is coming from or how you have access to this, especially if it is multimodal material. So it depends, really. I don't know if I've answered your question or you want to elaborate.
I found the problem that many Indonesian researchers don't try to make a permissions to collect the data from the comments. So when I try to publish my article, and then I got from the question from the review that have I get permission from the comment that I collect. So I just got confusing. Why I have to get permission, because many Indonesian researchers don't do that, researcher from abroad, they try to get permission of that.
Okay, so that's what I suspected. So basically, you have tried to publish this, and the reviewer is saying that have you got permission about using this stuff, right? I don't know what you can do. Actually, you can probably, because in the way that I see it, you don't have to bring in all the data in your publication. It's just examples that you have to put there. And you can. In my case, for example, that was 2014, and there was a poster that I analyzed, and they asked me, okay, where is this coming from, and where does it belong to? Do you have the permission and all of that? So what I did, I tried to contact the moderator of that group and saying that I'm going to use this and I want to know who it belongs to so that I can get a copyright or something like that. And then there was no reply. And then I told them, okay, I have contacted these people. There was no reply, and this poster is everywhere, so I think it's fine. So that's probably.
Can I have one more question? that's about my research now. I'm conducting about ideological of public. That is wait, I forgot. Ideological public in sexual violence on campus policy. So I mean that, can I try, what do I have to use a base of ideology theory to analyze the data that I have collected, that, but for the research I try to use a CDA approach. So what do you think about that?
Technically, I think that's a very good topic for CDA, and that's really excellent that you're doing that. But practically, that is a very sensitive topic, and I can understand why they are telling you that, because you may actually inadvertently, just give out the names or identity of people who are saying these comments, and that may endanger them, for example. So because it's a very sensitive topic, you have to be very careful about this and what you can. From a CDA perspective, yes, you should be able to do this, and that's fine. But from ethical point of view, my recommendation is for you to be very careful not to use any names or any anonymize the whole thing. It's not just anonymize the name; it's also about details that you may give out, and then people can recognize the person, But at the same time, you have to maybe get some clarity from your institution about what you can do. Okay, I mean that's what I would say. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, also Majid, for all of your responses. I think we're coming to an end of our seminar. I can see a few people have to leave because we have been going on a bit longer, which we always do, by the way. We never stick to the 1 hour mark. And if there's a good conversation, there's absolutely no reason to shut it down at 2 o'clock sharp. And I've really enjoyed your talk. I was just thinking this morning how very timely this is, because as you mentioned earlier, I'm one of the many users that uses products by Meta, and I'm an absolute victim to being bombarded by the same kind of topics because I made the mistake of clicking on it once. And just this morning, again, I had lots and lots of articles on the Amber Heard and Johnny Depp trial.
Oh, yeah,
which I'm actually, I don't know. I clicked on it once, and since then, it seems like because I make the mistake to consume my news through Facebook, so I follow newspapers there, and I feel like that's really what you should not be doing. And it reminded me of when I was writing my master's thesis and thinking, okay, what social media platform is representative where I can say there are meaning-making discussions that I'm the most influential? And back then, it was only Twitter. Yeah. Now I read newspaper articles that try to sum up what the public discourse is on an issue, drawing on TikToks, on Facebook comments, on tweets, and it's so broad. And I feel like the news and the new social media comments, it's all become one gray area where the same conversations are happening. And I was really interested in this though, because it reminded me the whole conversation we have now about Me Too and what's a believable victim. How does a believable victim have to behave in public in order to be trusted? It reminded me a lot of the what's her name, Amanda Knox, when she was on trial for the murder of her housemate, and she was actually tried to be guilty and not guilty and again guilty, and the public had this opinion on her because of her appearance and the way she behaved. And I feel like the same thing is happening now with Amber Heard. And I was very interested because there's quite a few news outlets that try to do exactly what you just suggested, but obviously on a completely different scale, analyzing what is the public sentiment and where does it stem from in a time of Me Too, that suddenly we say, well, she cried at the wrong time, so clearly she's making this up. And it is very interesting, and it is really fascinating to see that actually what you've been talking about, that journalists are now seem to understand themselves as doing exactly that, taking a very random and not very, like the sampling is definitely, you can dispute that.
That's a very good example. Actually, I use that example in my classes actually more than once, really, because that's very current, and that's exactly what it is. Because you know the logic of affectivity is replacing the logic of argumentativity. So in that sense, relatability is becoming more important than persuasion through our proper argumentation. And the fact that even if we scholars, we critical thinkers, if you like, even worse. But anyway, if we try to stay away from this and try to say, oh, this is not really what I want to be implicated in, even if we try, it is no escape, because the whole world seems to be operating with that logic more and more. And it's also not new even for the mass media. Okay, the scale of it is new, but before that, in the UK, we had one moment of one prime ministerial candidate, Ed Miliband, or the other, who couldn't eat a sandwich properly, and then he lost the whole thing because people didn't like the way he looked when he was biting the sandwich. You know, that's about affect as well. It's about relatability. So it's always been part of the discourse, really. It's just the scale of it and the way that it's systematically becoming like that. It's actually like bulldozing over a lot of the arguments in the Enlightenment and about the fact that we should separate this and make arguments and make decisions based on logics and all of that. Look at Brexit here, for example. It's not logical at all, but everybody's happy about it. It's, yeah, okay, good. You know, or the people literally were saying that we don't want experts, we don't want the logic, we want this to happen. You know, so for me, who was coming from you know, a Middle Eastern background, where it's my other home now, and I follow the news there in Iran, it's very common to have this sort of populist mindset, really. But for the West, within the past 10-20 years, there's a very interesting shift toward populism. It's like going backwards, really. And I don't know, I mean, where it's going to end, really. So we cannot avoid it, you know. And that was part of the argument that some people were saying that the moment of discourse is gone. This is part of that, because they say, oh, it's not about discourse in a sense of argumentation, really, which is something to be explored.
Yeah.
Go on.
No, sorry, that was exactly the moment in the Q&A where this example came to mind. When you mentioned that, that's when I thought, yeah, that's what it feels like, because suddenly everybody can analyze communication without any basis, any root in actual science. It's more like, I have a feeling for that person, and now I've made my decision. And then you get into these echo chambers online, and then you hear that other people feel the way you do. And then suddenly you think you're right. And this is how this sense of being right and righteousness is,
it's not just a sense, it has also material consequences, like for Me Too movement, for example, as virtuous as it is, it's also a pivotal change in the way that we punish people without a court. Because, you know, in that point, it was like, okay, so because it shifts, you know, for Amber Heard and Johnny Depp, there was first Johnny, and it had practical implication. There was money loss, there was mental health damage, all of that, because people thought this way or that way. And that's very weird, you know, because it shouldn't happen that way. I don't know. It's a bit more complicated for us to solve it now.
Yeah. And there's also the question of when this started, because I mean, this like innocent until proven guilty is something we've always said, but before social media, nobody already stuck to it. Like that was exactly. People love to judge, don't they?
Exactly. So it's just a tool to amplify and do it at an industrial level. I think Francesco had another question, and I'd like to see him talk.
Francesco, are you still?
Hi, Majid. Thank you so much for the talk. Just 1 second. Let me switch on the camera. Hi. No, I didn't have a question. I was just clapping. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. Good to see you. Good to see you, man. How are you?
Pretty good. Thanks.
Good. Okay. Sorry. I thought that you had a question.
No. That's great. No. You made me think a lot about, you know, stuff that we've discussed and that I've read about your work. So it was really interesting talk. Thanks.
Thanks so much for dropping by.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's one comment, unless Eleonora had a question, is that? No, okay. There's one comment by Mairead Tobin put in a comment, I guess. I read it as a comment. Many thanks, Majid, for an invigorating discussion, which captures the dynamic dimensions of social media. Also, it captures the interaction and intersection between online and offline worlds that we are immersed in, whether we like it or not. Interesting to see people abandoning particular platforms and displaying agentic, critical responses. Right, I guess perhaps trying to undermine the algorithms. For instance, maybe I don't know. Maybe that is what I put myself as a woman on Facebook, which had a really interesting algorithmic effect. So that is my little resistance.
Yeah,
but yeah,
I used to do this. I mean, up until recently, I am actually part of the pro-Brexit and anti-Brexit groups. And I could get, I try to confuse the algorithm a lot. I'm sorry to report that it doesn't work because it comes from so many different levels, including your family, including, I think, pretty much what they can hear us talk about. Seriously, it looks like, you mention something and then you get advert. So it's a very consolidated system, which feeds from different bank accounts, the supermarket shopping, what you watch, what you do online, your search engine, your phone, calls you get, text you send, all of this. I'm talking to my contractor about tiles, and then I get adverts about tiles in Facebook or other places, or Instagram, So it's so consolidated that and it's so much stronger than it was a few years ago. I don't think we can really escape, Plus, even though I know that I should be exposed to, for example, pro-Brexit material or racist material because I want to know what's going on, still it really infuriates me, even though, I can't, it's very interesting that it feels like even a person like me who is researching this stuff, you feel like it shouldn't come to my timeline. It's intrusion to my privacy. I should shut them out. Basically, I am more comfortable staying in my own echo chamber. So it's the reality. I don't think we can really circumvent that. It's much more complicated than that, and it's becoming. I only assume that it's going to be stronger in the future.
Yeah.
Great.
Okay.
On that quite depressing note, I guess. I think. Sorry, was there anyone else, Stephanie, who I overlooked?
No, I think people ask their questions.
Great. And we thank Majid again very much. Thank you so much for making the time and putting together an amazing talk. We really enjoyed it. The talk will be available online in, I guess, a few hours, maybe tomorrow. And you will all receive an email with the YouTube link. Okay, great. Thank you all. Have a lovely weekend and enjoy.
Take care. Hope to see you in person at some point. Eleonora, Francesco, hope to see you soon. Take care. Bye, everyone.
Take care. Bye.
Bye. Bye, everyone.